Yes, sir. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We welcome you to today's hearing on managing the Department of Defense in a time of tight budgets. Our hearing continues the committee's aggressive efforts to protect taxpayers at the same time we protect the troops and ensure our national security. This discussion is very timely. First, consider the budget. Much to its credit, the Obama administration this year delivered a budget with real growth in defense spending. However, the rate of this growth will not support all of the spending practices which have arisen over the last 12 years, during which the defense budget more than doubled. Furthermore, the significant federal deficit will make continuing real growth in the defense budget a challenge. Second, consider the Department of Defense management challenge. As illustrated in the Top Secret America series of articles in this week's Washington Post, the growth in contractors and government offices devoted to fighting terrorism since 9/11 is staggering. Most of this growth has occurred in the Department of Defense, though much of it falls in the area of intelligence. But a little of note at the Department of Defense was eliminated to make way for the new growth. Instead, the department has grown bigger. Managing all of this is exactly the job Congress assigned to the department's chief management officer, a job currently filled by Deputy Secretary of Defense Bill Lynn. And while Secretary Lynn could not be with us today, much to my regret, we have an excellent panel of witnesses with us. Beth McGrath, Deputy Chief Management Officer of the Department of Defense. Joe Westphal, Undersecretary of the Army. Robert Work, Undersecretary of the Navy, and one-time staff director of this committee, one who has done a wonderful job here and is doing a wonderful job for the Air Force, Erin, the Undersecretary of the Air Force. We welcome you back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Undersecretaries were designated by Congress to serve as chief management officers of their respective departments. Now, I've asked these witnesses to update the committee on exactly how they're creating the tools, the structures, and the systems necessary to manage the largest, most complex institution in the world. I've asked them to focus on a few issues in particular. Congress has mandated that the department must at long last get its finances in order and be ready for an independent audit by 2017. Will the department comply with the law? What progress has been made? The department has asked and received from Congress billions of dollars to modernize its business systems over the past 10 years. What do we have to show for this investment? Do we now have the kind of management information about our business operations that we need? When will we get there? Last, the committee has followed with great interest the efficiency initiative announced by Secretary Gates on May the 8th at the Eisenhower Library. We want to know how this initiative will work, when the department intends to share its findings with Congress. This committee stands foursquare behind efficiency. At the same time, we want to ensure that major budget decisions are well considered. We should not attempt to find efficiencies through the kind of mindless, across-the-board cuts that President Obama campaigned against. For my own part, I will note loud and clear that I am not for cutting the defense budget at this time. My understanding is that the Secretary's efficiency initiative is not about cutting the budget, but I look forward to hearing more about exactly how this initiative is designed to work. I'd like to also mention the fact that this committee successfully passed legislation regarding major weapon systems last year. Rob Andrews, Mike Conaway headed the panel, and its purpose was to reform the acquisition system of major weapon systems. And this committee is to be congratulated on it, as well as those two leaders. Also, we passed out and passed on the floor acquisition reform, and it is pending in the Senate and hopefully will be taken up with our defense bill that we have passed and sent to the Senate. This is the efficiency we have already stepped up to the plate and passed. So with that in mind, I turn to my colleague and my friend, the gentleman from California, Buck McKeon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. I'd like to thank our witnesses, all of you, for being here today. It's unfortunate that Secretary Lynn could not also join us, as both the Deputy Secretary and Chief Management Officer for the department, not to mention his role in helping to craft Secretary Gates' Efficiencies Initiative. It would have been valuable for the committee to hear from him at a hearing specifically dedicated to the Pentagon's management. As well, given that the formal responsibilities for CMO are still relatively new, excuse me, for the Deputy Secretary, we were also interested in his observations about that construct and his ability to balance his policy and management portfolios. With that said, we're grateful to have with us the Deputy Chief Management Officer, Ms. Beth McGrath, whose full-time job is to improve the department's management. I know Ms. McGrath has testified before this committee in the past, but I believe this is our first opportunity to have all of the undersecretaries, and I welcome all of you here. Given the important role that each of you play in serving as the Chief Management Officer of your respective departments, I look forward to the chance to discuss the various management challenges you face and your plans for mitigating risk to DOD's operations while improving efficiency. Secretary Conaton, notice how that just rolls off. Erin, I know I echo the chairman's sentiments when I tell you how pleased we are to see you again. Welcome home, so to speak. This is a timely hearing. Although the GAO and others have identified a series of persistent management risk areas for DOD, the department faces a looming management crisis in light of congressional delay in passing a clean wartime supplemental spending measure. The Senate passed its version of the appropriations bill in May, but the House failed to take up either a compromise version of the bill or the Senate-passed bill before the July 4th recess. Instead, the House amended the Senate bill by adding extraneous domestic spending and returned it to the Senate. Secretary Gates made it clear that if the supplemental was not enacted by July 4th, the department would have to begin to curtail defense operations. I know the chairman shares my conviction that the men and women in uniform operating in harm's way in Afghanistan and Iraq deserve better. Therefore, it's critical that we hear from each of you regarding the impacts this delay will have within your departments and how you intend to manage the risk to ongoing operations. Lastly, it should come as no surprise that we're interested to learn more specifics about how the services are implementing Secretary Gates' call for further efficiencies. While no one would argue against reducing waste or needless overhead, it remains unclear whether or not the department can find $100 billion in prudent savings over the next 5 years simply from efficiencies. In his May 8th speech at the Eisenhower Library, Secretary Gates stated, "The goal is to cut our overhead costs and to transfer those savings to force structure and modernization within the programmed budget." I support his intent to ensure that we do not accept a peace dividend that will hollow out our force structure and curtail modernization. What gives me pause, however, is that according to Deputy Secretary Lynn, the plan calls for a third of this money, about $33.3 billion, to come from, and I quote, developing efficiencies within the force structure and modernization accounts. So I want to make sure that we understand the plan. In order to protect force structure and modernization, we intend to cut force structure and modernization accounts. I hope that you'll clarify that for me. Likewise, press reports indicate that funding may not go directly to these investment accounts, and senior officials have been recently quoted as forecasting gradual drawdown in the investment accounts. I know our witnesses are unlikely to reveal planned cuts for future fiscal years, but I hope that you'll provide greater details regarding the process you're using to identify both the puts and takes and what measures besides funding cuts could generate savings? For example, what steps are you taking to improve your financial management and accountability? We look forward to your responses, and again, thank you for your time at this critical juncture. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Thank you for your comments. Now for the witnesses, and we again welcome each of you for this very, very important hearing. Elizabeth McGrath, you're on.
Sir, thank you and good morning. Chairman Skelton, Congressman McKeon, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the Department of Defense's efforts to improve its business operations. It's a pleasure to appear before you with my military department chief management officer counterparts. We look forward to continuing our work with you as we strive for greater efficiency, increased effectiveness, and additional agility within the department. While the department has always worked to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of its business operations, the imperative to achieve lasting results and the engagement of senior department leadership have never been greater. Secretary Gates and Secretary Lynn have clearly articulated the pressing need for reform. Today, I'd like to share with you our overarching management reform efforts as well as some recent successes. Our approach emphasizes improving our ability to assess execution through performance management, to develop mechanisms to ensure leadership accountability, and to make needed changes to the way we procure information technology. In each of these areas, we rely heavily on the tools that Congress has provided us through the last several National Defense Authorization Acts. I'll review with you our efforts in the areas of strategy, governance, process improvement, and information technology. The department has developed an integrated enterprise-wide business strategy to guide our transformation efforts. This strategic management plan aligns the planning and execution documents that exist throughout the enterprise. The plan identifies 5 cross-functional enterprise-wide business priorities, each with specific outcomes, goals, measures, and key initiatives that are critical for success. They are to support the all-volunteer force, to support contingency operations, reform the DOD acquisition process and support processes, enhance civilian workforce, and strengthen financial management. Of particular interest for today's hearing may be the department's efforts to improve financial management and move toward audit readiness. We have developed a plan that focuses on improving the quality of information that we use. By strengthening those processes that execute the dollars Congress provides to us, we also unite the enterprise around an effort that will benefit everyone, but also requires collaboration and support across the defense enterprise. We have also established long-term and near-term goals for audit readiness, provided programmed resources, and established a governance structure that includes the DCMO. Successful strategies rely on an effective management framework. This area of governance includes the creation of the Chief Management Officer, Deputy Chief Management Officer, and Military Department CMO positions. We recognize the committee's priorities include areas that have been designated as high risk by the Government Accountability Office. We share your focus on reducing such risk and are working across the department and the executive branch to address these challenges with the shared goals of removing items from that list. Personnel security clearances is a good example of where we have made significant progress. In 2005, the average time for the fastest 90% of initial clearances took 265 days. Today, that number is below 60. Additionally, in 2006, the backlog of pending clearance investigations stood at almost 1,000 cases. Today, that backlog is gone. Speed without quality may result in the wrong outcome. Therefore, we have actively engaged DAO to exchange ideas regarding quality performance measures for clearance investigations and adjudications. Collectively, we believe the quality measures being developed identify specific quantifiable targets linked to goals. This type of engagement is critical to addressing and eliminating high-risk issues. As the committee knows, information technology is a key enabler of our business operations in an area with potential for major improvements. One of the deputy's highest management priorities is improving the acquisition, development, and fielding of IT systems. Our current approach to implementing IT takes too long, costs too much, and often fails to deliver the performance improvements we seek. On average, it takes 81 months in DOD from when an IT program is first funded to when it is fielded. We often deliver systems that are outdated before we ever turn them on. In contrast, the iPhone took 2 years from concept to delivery. It is clear we need a different approach. To that end, Secretary Lynn has established an IT acquisition reform task force guided by 4 principles: speed, incremental development, governance, and adaptability. We need to match the acquisition process to the technology development cycle. We must also acknowledge that incremental development testing wherever possible and fielding of new capabilities to provide better outcomes in IT than trying to deploy a big bang approach. We must carefully examine how our requirements govern the acquisition. We must recognize that different IT applications demand different levels of oversight and enterprise integration. With these principles in mind, we are working to outline a series of acquisition paths that apply high levels of institutional due diligence where it is needed and strip away excess requirements where it is not. Focusing on business operations at the Department of Defense is an area of great and immediate interest to our senior leadership, as well as an area of serious activity and concerted efforts. We are on the way to creating better business processes that will create the kind of lasting results our country deserves. My CMO counterparts and I look forward to the continued opportunities to work with Congress to optimize performance across the department. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. The Honorable Joe Westphal.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Ranking Member McKeon, thank you. Distinguished members of the committee. I'd like to ask, Mr. Chairman, that my statement be made part of the record. And I just want to make a couple of brief points.
Without objection, each prepared statement will be made part of the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to make a couple of brief points. The first is to bring you greetings from John McHugh, Secretary of the Army. I was with him this morning, and he really regrets not being invited to this hearing, but he's thankful that Erin Conaton is here, and he figures he couldn't compete against her today. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I think we're all going to be very repetitive in saying to you and stating to you over and over how grateful I think we all are at the great care and support that you give our sailors, Marines, soldiers, and airmen, their families, and our civilian workforces. As some of you know, and you, Mr. Chairman, I worked in this great institution many years ago, and we know fully well how challenged you are to make so many decisions across everything from social programs to national security. But we do know and understand that you know the great sacrifices that our men and women in uniform and their families make in support of our national defense and our freedoms and our protections and our way of life every single day. And your steadfast support is well known and highly respected by all of us. And so I commit to you that we in the Army will do our part to ensure that that support that we have from you is not diminished, that we will increase our efforts to generate savings, reduce cost, enhance performance, and create efficiencies. Our soldiers' ability to complete the mission depends on it. Their families depend on it. Secretary of Defense and the President demand it. And as the Chief Management Officer, this is my focus. My two great colleagues to my left here and I are doing something really unprecedented, having been in the department before. This is the first time, I think, that you have the 3 undersecretaries, not only now as chief management officers, but in their role as undersecretaries as well, collaborating on a regular basis to exchange ideas. We meet regularly to find ways to make joint efforts work better and create greater efficiency. So your designation of us as chief management officers have actually created a great opportunity for our military departments to be more co-joined and work together on a regular basis. We're also very closely aligned with OSD, and especially through the Deputy Chief Management Officer, Ms. Beth McGrath. Her experience, her leadership, her knowledge of these issues is helping us immensely to get ourselves coordinated so that we're aligned not only horizontally, but we're aligned vertically within the department. Finally, Mr. Chairman, and on March 1st, the Army submitted a report to the committee on our business transformation. It was an attempt to give you an idea of what we were working on to put together our business transformation plan, which we intend to deliver promptly and on time to you on October 1st of this year. So with that, I thank you again for your tireless efforts in support of our armed services and our Army. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Robert Work.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Congressman McKeon, distinguished members of the committee, it really is an honor. I'll echo both Joe and Beth's sentiments that to be with you here today with the other undersecretaries and with Beth to talk to you about our plans to continue improvement within the Department of the Navy. I'd also like to echo Joe's thanks to the committee. After 9 years of war, your support has just been instrumental to allowing us to maintain the Marine Corps and the Navy to the high level that we have today. So on behalf of Secretary Mabus and I'd like to echo Joe's thanks. And the Secretary Mabus and I and the entire department look forward to future collaboration with you on the committee as we partner to achieve these enduring transformation objectives that you have set out for us. I spent a lot of time trying to divine the intent of the Chief Management Officer position, and as I see it, the committee and Congress envisions this role to be the leader of transformation across the department enterprise. And I also believe that you thought that business operations was a subset of management, and management extends across the entire Department of the Navy and in both the Marine Corps and the Navy itself. So we're looking beyond the business side of the enterprise, and we intend to apply the same type of rigor that I think that you are looking for in not only business operations, but weapon systems and other programs across the department. Secretary Mabus is interested not only in making the trains run on time, but on making the trains run to different places. And we believe that that was your intent. Our goal is to establish then a legacy of transformation in the Department of the Navy, instill a culture of business innovation and ingenuity, and codify the role of the Chief Management Officer and the Deputy Chief Management Officer within the department. We also are looking very hard at having the proper government forum. So our Business Transformation Council is the way we do this. That is chaired by myself, the Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps, and the Vice Chairman, because we have found in the last year, and this just reinforces a long-known code, that you have to get both the Secretariat and the service staffs really invested into business transformation, or you're not going to be able to have any lasting change. So we have the warfighters and the Assistant Secretary of the Navy embedded in this process from the very beginning. We're also trying to strengthen our Deputy Chief Management Officer position. Also, we are doing consolidations within the Secretariat to align us better with the business operations that Beth pointed out to you. We're really focused on business processes, but we are very, very focused on achieving a fully auditable financial statements by 2017. We actually are hopeful we will beat that timeline. Implementing ERP across the department, really spending a lot of time on acquisition and contracting excellence, following the lines of what Secretary Carter set out a week ago, and really trying to improve energy efficiencies across the department. So in closing, we very much appreciate the legislation that Congress has enacted, which really allows us to delve deep and to go into re-engineering of our processes and implementing transformational change. We recognize that this is going to be challenging and difficult, but we're committed to working with you to effect this change. We definitely do want to foster the business transformation. We need to efficiently and effectively support the Navy and the Marine Corps and our civilians. And I thank you again very much for your continued support and look forward to working with all of you in the future. I'll be happy to answer your questions after the completion of our statements.
Thank you very much. The Honorable Erin Conaton, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. McKeon, members of the committee. Given everything that my colleagues have already said, I'll try to be brief and just echo the high points, but let me start by saying it's really nice to be back in this room. I'm convincing myself this is just markup. You know, I'm just sitting at the table just like markup. But it's great to see you and all my former staff colleagues in the room here. I also, as long as I'm in the thanking mode, want to thank my colleagues at this table, not only for the partnership that Secretary Westphal talked about in terms of our ongoing interactions, but I'm very much the new kid on the block. I've only been in the job a couple months, and these folks have been outstanding in terms of not only partnering, but lending the benefit of their expertise in the department over the period of time that they've been there. So I thank them for that. I think we have to, I have to start the same way they did by acknowledging the work that this committee has done in numerous National Defense Authorization Acts and in the Weapons System Acquisition Reform Act. Your work has had tremendous impact in the department, and it's hard for me to think of a week going by that I'm not at a meeting where people are talking about the implementation of WSARA, what the intent of the Congress was. So I know you know that your efforts have an impact, but if we can reinforce that, I am happy to have the opportunity to do so. Like my colleagues, I would say that the Chief Management Officer construct relies on strong leadership from the top. And so the fact that we have secretaries and chiefs of our respective services who are committed not only to making this organizational construct work, but also to help further the business transformation objectives that we're working on makes a big deal. The other thing I would say is that all of us put mission first. So this is about the work that our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines are out there doing every day. And business transformation can't be separate from that. It has to be very much aligned with what we're asking service members and our civilian workforce to do on a regular basis. And so as I've been thinking about the Chief Management Officer job, I think first, what's the mission that we're asking, in our case, our airmen to do, and then how do we get processes and systems that help support that? So I think whether it's with the business transformation plans that you all have required or in our own thinking as Chief Management Officers, it's important to align our business objectives with what the service or the department, in Ms. McGrath's case, is doing overall. We in the Air Force have a similar construct, I think, to what Secretary Work talked about, which is that we have an overall governance structure called the Air Force Council. It's how we make our budget decisions every year. It's how we adjudicate policy debates that are occurring inside the service. And it's also the group that we're using for governance of overall business transformation and the efficiencies initiative. It's critical that all of the folks who are working, whether it be our assistant secretaries or the deputy chiefs of staff on the air staff side, are invested in and committed to working these efforts. Once we get that done, then I think we can focus on the goals of, on the business side of the house. We obviously have a couple large information technology programs that I'd be happy to talk about if you want to get into that. We too are very focused on the efforts led by this committee on getting a clean audit in the FY17 timeframe and doing everything we can to do that as soon as possible. And on the efficiency side, we are partners with the rest of my colleagues in trying to find a way to, again, mission first, get as much money and capability into the force structure, modernization, and readiness sides of the account. And I think that is what is motivating the work that Secretary Gates has put forward, and it's certainly motivating the work that Secretary Donnelly and General Schwartz are undertaking for the Air Force. So with that, I will turn it back to the chairman and just say thank you again for the opportunity to come home.
Thank you very much. It's great to have you back. Mr. Work, the spotlight has been on some shipbuilding. On the one hand, we have the USS Missouri, Virginia attack submarine being commissioned later this month, which, by the way, is in the district of Congressman Joe Courtney, ahead of schedule and under budget. Compare that to the problems that you've been having with the littoral combat ship effort, the excessive overruns. Add to that the reform legislation that we passed from this committee and that it became law. Will the legislation that we authored be of help in making the shipbuilding more like what's going on in Groton, Connecticut? And if so, how, Mr. Work?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Mabus set as his #1 priority when he came aboard last year in May, and really taking a hard look at the shipbuilding, and that was followed quickly by the WSAR Act, which really kind of struck a chord within the Department of the Navy, making sure that we get the requirements absolutely right, looking for the right type of contracts, making sure that we demand performance throughout the level. You are true, it is of course true, sir, that we've had problems with the LCS, but I think as the committee knows, as a result of the WSARA and also our determination to make sure that that program is right, we completely changed the acquisition strategy. And although we're not quite complete with the down select yet, I'm quite confident in telling the committee we will definitely reach the congressional cost cap regardless of which ship is chosen. As you said, I think we're having great success in our attack submarine program, on our TAKEs that are being built at NASCO, and we're having good performance across the yard. So right now we're really focused on really making sure we get requirements right. We're doing that on the SSB and X, and Secretary Mabus and I are committed to making sure that we get the best bang for the buck for our shipbuilding dollars.
The GAO originally proposed a second Deputy Secretary of Defense for management. Is it reasonable to expect the Deputy Secretary of Defense to serve as the Chief Management Officer in addition to all of his other duties? Ms. McGrath?
Sir, thank you. The construct of the Deputy Chief Management Officer working as the day-to-day focus of the financial and other management issues, working with the other undersecretaries across the department, so far has been extremely effective. The Deputy Secretary spends quite a bit of his time on management and business-related issues, from financial management to health, information technology, wounded warrior. There's a lot of his time is spent on those topics today. So I believe the construct of the Deputy Secretary as the Chief Management Officer with someone in the Deputy Chief Management Officer role, currently myself, working across the department from an OSD perspective and also with the Chief Management Officers of the military departments, thus far has proven effective.
Allegedly, there will be savings identified in the effort to have efficiencies across the department. If that is the case, where do those savings go? I, for one, am not for cutting the defense budget. Where do they go, Ms. McGrath?
So as you articulated in your opening statement, the Secretary Gates has identified a call to look across the department, every aspect of the defense business and everything we do, from our support structures to our organizational construct, to see if there's a better, more efficient and effective way that we can deliver our capability. The Secretary has articulated that the military departments will keep the savings that they identify. And again, I think it was mentioned in the opening statements that we are looking to shift dollars from support to force structure and operations.
Let me ask you this. Are the respective services making the necessary investments to meet the 2017 auditing mandate?
Each of the military departments, services, and defense agencies components have identified their milestones to achieve the 2017 goal of the clean audit opinion. Those are captured in the financial audit improvement report. Financial improvement audit readiness, the FIRE plan, is the document where each of the milestones for each of the components are articulated, marching toward the 2017 goal.
I think it was the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Conaway, who brought it to our attention about the lack of auditing within the department in the panel's role of putting together the second initiative that we passed and is now pending in the Senate. How did this ever happen that the department and its sub-departments were not subject to auditing, Ms. McGrath?
Not sure that we were that we were given a pass from audit. I think the responsibility for our fiduciary responsibility and our stewardship of taxpayer dollars certainly is a responsibility identified and acknowledged across the department. I think the challenge in actually delivering an auditable financial statement has many factors to it. Some of it is human capital based. Other is the fact that our financial systems today, our financial plus our other functional feeder systems are not interoperable, which poses a huge challenge for us, and then that it must be a department-wide function to actually achieve auditability. It cannot be viewed as just a comptroller responsibility, given that most of the information comes from other functional areas. So I think there is a recognition within the department that we understand what we need to do from a departmental perspective, that we do have a plan in place with goals and milestones. We have appropriate governance that reaches horizontally and vertically in the department, and without those, we would not be able to achieve that, and I believe we are positioned to do that today.
Mr. McKeon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I alluded to in my opening statement, I remain particularly concerned about the steps the Department of Defense is having to take to manage its finances in lieu of passage of the 2010 wartime supplemental appropriation. Secretary Gates has told us that if we don't have it enacted by July 4th, stupid things would begin to happen. I'd like to ask each of the witnesses to address the following. What specific steps are you having to take now to avoid running out of money? Please describe the overall risk and the impacts these steps will have to ongoing operations, routine business, the military and civilian workforce, training, other important parts of the responsibilities that you have. And when specifically will each of your departments run out of money? When will you be unable to provide cash flow? What are the additional consequences of your departments and the Defense Department as a whole should Congress fail to pass a clean supplemental before the August recess, which starts after next week? Please.
For the Army, the consequences are pretty significant. I think the Secretary's right. This is very, very important that before you leave in recess, we have the supplemental approved. We have been fronting some of the resources from our O&M accounts to ensure that all operational requirements are kept fully funded, and we continue to do that. We've sent some reprogramming. We've prepared in anticipation of this some potential reprogramming requests. We hope that they're not going to have to be exercised and the supplemental will be passed. To your question specifically, you know, we will run out of money about the middle of August for some of these functions in our own O&M accounts, and so we will have to begin to take steps to ensure that we, first of all, continue to support fully all the operational requirements. I don't think we're going to have any issues with that, but we will have to make some decisions in terms of our O&M functions, particularly OCONUS here, CONUS, not OCONUS, that may have some impact. and that depends on how quickly you can get back and then pass a supplemental after that. And if we get those reprogramming requests done, that may help us to weather that storm through the period of time you're in recess.
Sir, from the Department of Navy perspective, failure to pass a supplemental before the recess would really essentially hamstring the department's operations for the remainder of this year and significantly disrupt operations within the department. Our analysis is the same as Secretary Westphal's, that we would run out of money for civilians probably around the mid of August and have to start furloughing civilians in large numbers. We think we would run out of money to pay active duty members sometime in the mid-September to late September timeframe. And that's not even accounting for all of the movements in the O&M programs that would have to be occurred to make sure that we would continue wartime operations. From our perspective, then, it would be a very great burden on the department and the Department of Defense as a whole, and would really significantly prevent us from pursuing the job of the department and the nation.
Mr. McKeon, for the Air Force, it's a very similar situation as to what my other two colleagues mentioned. Certainly encourage as quickly as possible the passage of the supplemental. In terms of specific dates, the Air Force runs out of O&M, operations and maintenance funding to do the whole range of operational activities at the end of August, and then has military personnel accounts running out by the third week in September. Like my colleagues, we're very hopeful that you all will be able to send something to the President prior to the August recess, but we're starting to think about what would have to be done in the event that that didn't occur, which would include things like furloughs. We may be able to do some temporary additional reprogramming, but that wouldn't buy very much time. So very consistent with what my colleagues have said.
I think it was about 2 months ago that we had General McChrystal here, and I asked him the same question, and he said if it went into the summer it would cause problems, but he had been assured it would pass before the Memorial Day break. Now we missed that. We missed the 4th of July break. If it were passed today, does that money immediately flow, or how soon before that money reaches you? If it were passed today by the House and today by the Senate, how long would it take for that money to actually get into your accounts?
It would be very quick, and it would be a seamless process. We wouldn't have these effects that we all outlined today.
You've already taken some steps, though.
We have in the Army, we have moved monies from our base into some of our operations to support those missions, to keep them moving in theater in particular. So we have addressed that issue internally, and we do that always with the permission of the Congress.
So are you saying that if we passed it today, you would have the money in your accounts next Monday?
Well, that technicality I don't really understand, but
does anyone here understand that?
But I think we all have an appreciation for the process, but the specific date, how many days specifically it takes to get from passage into the accounts. I certainly would be happy to take that for the record to find out how many days that would be. But I think the message is that it is we believe that if it was passed today, it would be in sufficient time such that other activities would not have to be executed as the undersecretaries have articulated.
Could you get that back to us?
Yes.
As quickly as you can? Today I'd like to know if it's possible, because my concern is that among some people in the House, there isn't quite the sense of urgency. I've been given different time frames that even if we passed it today, it would take some time, and I'd like to know that. Obviously, we're not going to pass it today, and we're not going to be in session tomorrow, so it'll be sometime next week at the soonest. And I, for one, think that if it's not done, we shouldn't leave town until it's done. So I'm hopeful that we will get it done as soon as possible next week, so that you don't have to take some of these steps. I'm concerned that some things that are happening, I know we're not going to leave the troops in harm's way without ammunition and without food and without the things that they need to carry out their mission. But I'm concerned about training or some of the other ongoing activities that take place for the troops that will be going over there next. And I'm very concerned about getting that money there. Yes.
Well, just to add to what you were just saying, for example, in the Army, one of the ways we support, of course, or the way we support our ongoing missions is through what we call the generating force, which is exactly what you mentioned. It's training and readiness of our Army forces here to go forward. And of course, all the infrastructure that we have in the department is to support those missions in any case. And there are rules, personnel rules, if, as Secretary Conaton mentioned, if there are furloughs, there are rules about advance notice to employees and things of that nature that we have to take into account. And we are either past or dangerously close to those deadlines. I'm not sure what they are. We'll get you that information as well. But all of that causes us a great deal of concern, as you have heard from all of us.
That's a concern I have. Then after the supplemental's done, then we get to the point of talking about the defense appropriation bill. The year ends September 30th. It looks to me like we're not going to have an appropriation bill passed by September 30th, which means then we get to a CR, hopefully, so that we don't shut down the government on September 30th. So if we get a CR, that also is disruptive with ongoing operations, is it not?
Well, sir, we've all lived with continuing resolutions before, so it does cause us to do choices in business that we otherwise wouldn't have to. But if the supplemental is not passed, we would be in an emergency situation. I mean, we've already talked about this within the department, where all of the unders and all of the secretaries, we would all have to get together to try to work our way through it. So the continuing resolution is something the department is used to handling, and we are able to handle it much better than if the supplemental isn't passed. We would consider that an emergency.
Thank you very much.
Thank the gentleman. Gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all of our guests, but particularly Secretary Conaton for joining us today. Secretary Westphal, I received a really disturbing email from a Mississippi National Guardsman on his second deployment. It is from his dad, who is a Vietnam combat veteran, and it mentions the lack of ammunition, but equally importantly, the lack of rollers. That this unit is doing a mine-clearing mission in Afghanistan. They do have the MRAPs, but unlike when he served in Iraq and had a roller in front of that MRAP, he doesn't have it in Afghanistan. Now, and this really is to this point that I appreciate that you're trying to save dollars where you can, but there's an inconsistency here that I don't understand. We apparently have excess rollers in Iraq now because of the drawdown. We have this Air Force telling us that they do not need additional C-17s, but I'm told we can't get the rollers to Afghanistan because of a lack of airlift. Now, either you have enough C-17s to get them there or you don't. And if you don't have enough to get them there, obviously you don't have enough C-17s. So I certainly hope this isn't a case where we're trying to save a couple of pennies and will unnecessarily lose American lives or limbs. And I would very much encourage you to look into this because it is a matter of life and death. Secondly, if you could comment to it, I remember as we were losing our bases in Panama, going to visit that country on several occasions, our bases there, and seeing, having started off in local government and state government, and realizing that their budget's always tight. Seen a heck of a lot of things there we should have brought home: fire trucks, bulldozers, tracos, backhoes, that state surplus agencies would have loved to have had, and encouraging a lot of people in the Army then to bring those things home, only to be told, well, the shipping costs don't make it worthwhile. And being particularly angry when 60 Minutes or someone like them ran a special showing that those bulldozers in some instances ended up in Havana instead of some town in Mississippi or some other state. I visited Balad just before Christmas last year, and the colonel there told me about he had an amnesty for people to turn in equipment. And on the amnesty day, he had a 2-mile line of equipment that people had turned in that was not on the books, that had been paid for by the American taxpayer, that some clever unit commander had figured out a way to get it there because he felt like his unit needed it. And I commend those clever unit commanders for getting the things they needed. What I don't see is an equally clever effort to get those things home. Just this week in the Transportation Committee, most of the carriers that have brought the equipment to Iraq testified before the committee that they're bringing some of that equipment out. Most of the carriers, no, all of the carriers testified that their ships are leaving Kuwait anywhere from 40 to 60% at 40 to 60% of capacity, which means that those ships are leaving Kuwait with either anywhere from 40 to 60% excess capacity to be bringing these things home. Given that, money's tight, that the taxpayers paid for these things, what are you doing to incentivize unit commanders to bring these things home, even if they don't need it, that some other governmental entity may need it, or that a state or local government may need it? Because, again, we got burned when we left Panama. We got burned when we left Roosevelt Roads. How many times does the Department of Defense have to keep making the same mistake?
Well, actually, the two issues you raised are, have, specific points like that have been made by other members and by our own folks. I believe it was in late July that I was going to go to the go to theater, go to Kuwait, and then Iraq, and look specifically at the drawdown and at the movement of equipment both back to CONUS and into Afghanistan. Now decided to do that in September, to wait till after we're supposed to be down to the 50,000 level. I discussed this with General Odierno and General Webster, the ARCENT commander. I've asked the Vice Chief of Staff, Pete Corelli, to go with me because we're doing a whole bunch of work together, the Vice and I, on the management, on the acquisition side, and on the contracting side. So we're going to team up to go there and take a hard look at all the things that you
Mr. Westphal, before the chairman gavels us, could you find the time to stop by and see me on those two items?
I'll do that.
Thank you, sir.
Thank the gentleman, Mr. Bartlett. Who's next? Mr. Forbes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for taking time to be here with us today. The title of this hearing, the chairman correctly said, was Managing a Budget in a Time of Tight Budgets. And Secretary Work, one of the things that I think every one of you would agree with is the key to that is consistency, which is probably has at least two components. One is a careful selection of our priorities initially, and the second thing is the ability that we have to predict circumstances that could or would change those priorities down the road. Now, we have a number of different major opportunities to both set those priorities and look at circumstances that could change them. One of the big ones is BRAC, where we just bring everybody together and we say, what are our priorities, and we look at that. The other one, of course, is the QDR. And I'm particularly concerned because in the last BRAC we had this huge laydown we had looking at priorities and where we were in BRAC of 2005 and also in the QDR of 2006. There wasn't a blip on the screen about home porting a carrier in Mayport, Florida. My good friend from Mississippi mentioned saving a couple of pennies. This isn't a couple of pennies, this is almost $1 billion. Can you tell me today what were the, and I know the priorities haven't changed because I have a memorandum from the President on June 10th where he says for decades the federal government has managed more real estate than necessary to effectively support its programs and missions, and he says we need to take immediate steps to better use the remaining real estate assets that we have. Can you tell me what were the circumstances that changed between BRAC 2005 and the QDR in 2006 and the QDR in 2010, which would lead the Navy to want to homeport a carrier in Mayport in the QDR in 2010, when it didn't raise that at all in BRAC 2005 or 2006? And then why was it that we didn't have the capabilities of predicting that change in BRAC in 2005 and the QDR in 2006?
Well, thank you, sir. As you know, this has been an issue that the Department of the Navy has been examining for quite some time. Essentially, we believe in efficiencies, we believe in establishing priorities, and we also believe in using our real estate wisely. As you know, Mayport has long been a carrier port.
Yeah, and Mr. Again, just because I got a limited amount of time, I want you to have all the time you need, but I just want the change in circumstances between BRAC 2005, the QDR in 2006, and the QDR in 2010.
All right, sir. BRAC 2005 really was focused on closing properties, and this instance, we're maintaining the property at Mayport, the base, which is going to house a lot of our surface combatants, and we want to make it a carrier home port for a nuclear carrier. So the movement from BRAC to the QDR, which looked at the strategic rationale on doing that.
But didn't you have that same strategic rationale in the QDR in 2006?
Sir, I'd have to go back and see exactly what the 2006 QDR
Is there a difference in rationale we have on any QDR? Don't we always looking at the same basic criteria in our QDRs?
Yes and no, sir. We have the basic priorities set, but we look at our posture both in the United States and globally repeatedly.
Can you do this for me? Would you just get back to me in writing on the exact changes between that happened between BRAC 2005, the QDR in 2006, and that QDR in 2010, and why we couldn't have predicted those and raised them in the BRAC 2005 and 2006. And I got one other question that you can either answer now and get back to me. Chairman asked, will the department comply with the law? Can you give us a comfort level that we will have the law complied with when a year ago we had in the statute a requirement for a shipbuilding plan and an aviation plan that be sent to us by the department? Not only was the statute not complied with, but when we had a congressional inquiry that was unanimously agreed upon by this committee, there was not even an explanation of why that wasn't complied with. How do we have comfort that you're going to comply with the law down the road if we didn't get a compliance with that statute?
Well, sir, I know I can speak with Secretary Mavis that both he and we will comply with every law that we can. We also respond to guidance from the Secretary of Defense. And in the case of last year, the Secretary of Defense, I think quite rightfully said, because of the difficulties we were having in shipbuilding, that we would move that up and have the Deputy Secretary sign it out.
My time is up. The only thing I would say is I hope that we don't come back on the audits and say that because of the difficulties we have in complying with the audits, we're not going to do them. And, Mr. Chairman, I yield back balance my time.
Thank the gentleman. Dr. Snyder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing. I just want to make the introductory comment. I appreciate the leadership of both Mr. Skelton and Mr. McKeon on the issue of the supplemental. I guess our most junior member here is Mr. Kreitz, but from the most senior to the most junior member, we agree with you. We need to get the supplemental passed sooner rather than later, and I think your candor this morning helps that. I'm always struck by these kinds of hearings in which the goal is to help American taxpayers save hundreds of billions of dollars. It always strikes me like a junior high sex education class. It should be really exciting, but it turns out it's not. I want to, Secretary Conaton, I think I will direct my questions to you since we have the Little Rock Air Force Base in my district. Help me understand and I've read through the statements and all, and we can get bogged down in kind of the jargon of business transformation, those kinds of things. But let me give you a couple examples and just how you put them in the context of what you're trying to do. We have a military construction project that's about finished in at the Little Rock Air Force Base. It's outside the perimeter. It's an education center where Arkansas State University offers classes, and some of the classes that the institutions that offer classes around the country offer classes there for both military personnel and civilian personnel from the community. Several years ago, the city of Jacksonville passed a millage on themselves, raised $5 million to donate to the military to help in the construction of the facility. But the only way we were able to get that done was to do it as an earmark in the defense bill, because it was like the Air Force wasn't agile enough to figure out a way to accept $5 million of local dollars. So my question is, why don't we have that kind of agility? Another issue is on and this is where Congress gets involved, have we given you the kind of flexibility you need in the terms of the retirement of old planes? I think we're doing okay with E-model C-130s. I'm not so sure we're doing so well with C-5s and some of the others. And finally, any kind of update you can give on the aviation modernization program with regard to C-130s. But use those as examples and explain how that fits into what you all are trying to do.
Thank you, Dr. Snyder. I'm not familiar with the specifics in this instance with Little Rock, but let me speak more generally to agility. I guess where I would start is, and I knew this going into the job, but it's remarkable how large these organizations are and how diffuse responsibilities are. But to that end, I think as we've started to think about Secretary Gates's mandate on efficiencies, one of the things we've done, and I suspect my colleagues have done something similar, is to engage not only our major command commanders, so folks who are not in Washington, who are out in command and with responsibility for our numbered air forces, to get their perspective and to get their views of how we can do things better, because I think there's often a Washington perspective, and those who are elsewhere in the country and who have a more operational day-to-day focus, we have to take those views on. So from my perspective, increasing agility is one piece of the larger perspective that we've got on doing our work better, and in the process freeing up resources that can be put toward modernization and force structure. On the issue of retirement of aircraft, I certainly appreciate the support of the Congress in trying to ensure that whether it's C-130s or whether it's our larger strategic airlift aircraft, that we can get the most modern planes to our units. And in many cases that involves trying to retire some of the oldest fleets on the book to put savings into our more modern aircraft. I think in terms of, I think on the C-130 side that we're in good shape in terms of authorization. I know there's some language in this committee's bill that deal with some of the specific issues around National Guard C-130s, and we'll certainly work with the committee on that. I think as we go into next year, we may need to be in dialogue with this committee about the Title 10 restrictions on the size of the strategic airlift force structure dealing with C-5 and C-17 modernization. But I think that's an issue for 12, and we'd be happy to work with you all on that.
I was on a live media show this morning back home, and they called us to ask about this hearing today, and one of the questions was, what kind of message does this send to troops in the field that we're trying to in their words, cut defense budget? My own view is, well, I'll direct that to you, Secretary Work. How do you respond to that question?
Sir, I've been the victim of many a cut drill, just a budget cut drill, and this is fundamentally different. This is, we are trying to find efficiencies to actually help the Marine and the soldier in the field, and to help the airmen and the sailors. The guidance has been very clear. Secretary Gates has said we get to keep the money, and therefore I think there is widespread enthusiasm to go after these types of efficiencies to help our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. So in no way I think I can speak for my colleagues, because we meet so often, as Secretary Westphal and Secretary Conaton said. We do not in any way think this is a cut drill, and we think this is going to directly benefit our young servicemen and women.
Thank you.
Mr. Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. Welcome and or welcome back. I'm getting nostalgic here for a minute in perhaps an unpleasant way. And I was thinking of Dr. Snyder's comments and question about agility. And if I go back to 1988 when I had hair and was much younger and was still in uniform, I reported to the Marine headquarters and found out that there was a discussion going on in the acquisition world in the Marine Corps, the famous ACMAC committee, about how we were going to buy computers. And while they were trying to decide how to buy computers, there were Marines in the Marine headquarters and every base across the nation who were going out using O&M funds and buying computers and operating systems and software, however they saw fit. And then those got old and they bought new ones with O&M while the ACMAC committee was still trying to figure out how to buy computers. Now that's over 20 years ago. New Marines have signed up, gone on active duty, served 20 years, retired, and I hear from Secretary McGrath that it's taken 81 months, 7 years, to bring on IT systems. I'm just a little depressed, but it does tell me that we still don't have the agility that Dr. Snyder was talking about, and it seems to me that you, Chief Management Officers, have got to figure out how to get agile for the services and for the department. And I don't have a question because I simply wouldn't have enough time for you to try to answer what you can't answer, but please, let's look at the agility. I do have a question, and it's connected to another nostalgic kind of flashback, this time going back to post-Vietnam when we ran out of money. Department ran out of money, the services ran out of money, and we parked them. I was flying helicopters, except we couldn't fly them. We put them on the flight line. We couldn't even go out and turn them. We certainly couldn't fly them because we're out of flight hour program. We're out of O&M or O&M in. We couldn't fly. And that, today, if that were to happen, if we don't have the supplemental that Mr. McKeon was talking about, would prevent us from training. If you have to park or anchor or dock the ships and if you have to park the planes, and I find that pretty scary. But what I find terrifying, and I want to just make sure I understood this, is I thought I heard each of you, or at least half of you, two of you say that you were going to be, your O&M accounts were being affected, you were shifting O&M money, and that tells me that we might be in that situation where once again we have to park them. But what I found truly shocking was that I thought I heard you say that you were going to not be able to pay in the manpower accounts the men and women that were asking to sail and fly and drive and fight aren't even going to get paid. And if that were so, how do you make a distinction? Because one of our assumptions has been, well, the troops in theater are going to have what they need, and we'll let the troops at home and their families suffer to make sure that those that are in harm's way have everything they need. But it sounds to me like we might not even be able to pay those troops in harm's way unless you somehow split the manpower account and say, well, we're going to pay those soldiers in Afghanistan, but we're not going to pay the soldiers at Fort Campbell. So my question is, are we really looking at not paying, not only civilians, which is horrifying enough, but not paying the men and women in uniform that are flying, sailing, fighting? And I guess, I don't know if it varies by, if it's a department-wide or varies by service, so please give us an answer. They're going to get paid or not?
They will get paid. I'll speak for the Army. What we're concerned about is our civilian, many of our civilian workforce in some of these O&M accounts. That's our chief concern.
Okay, so for the Army, the soldiers get paid, but civilians may be furloughed and not paid. Secretary Work, what about the Navy?
Sir, as you have said, we've sometimes dealt with having to shift O&M monies at the end of a fiscal year, but quite frankly, the department was expecting the supplemental to be before the 4th of July. We weren't, there was really no serious thinking that it would go beyond the summer recess. And so our analysis, which isn't complete, as I said, we would shift into an emergency mode if the supplemental was not passed. As Secretary Westphal said, the first thing that would happen is we'd have to probably furlough civilians without pay. And in mid to late September, there is a chance that we would run out of money to pay active duty personnel.
Sailors in uniform would not get paid.
There is
Secretary Conaton, how about the Air Force?
Mr. Klein, it's very similar to what Secretary Work said. If we still did not have money the third week of September, that's when the military manpower accounts would be affected.
So the pilot, the bomber, the attack pilot in Afghanistan would be asked to fly those missions and would not be paid.
If we go beyond the third week in September.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Andrews.
Mr. Chairman, these are all the reasons why I'm confident the supplemental will be quickly enacted. I did want to, I'm well aware of the fact that there's a broad consensus in the United States that we want to have every dollar necessary to defend our country. There's an understanding that there are asymmetric threats and different qualitative threats than we faced in 1998. But here is the way, and this is not meant to be a rhetorical question, here is the way many of our constituents would ask the question about management and budget in the Department of Defense. If you exclude spending for foreign operations, if you exclude supplementals for Iraq and Afghanistan as special needs, and go back to the base defense budget, the base defense budget in the fiscal year in which we're presently living is 47% higher than it was in 1998. Again, that counts none of the Iraq and Afghanistan supplemental. Our end strength is 0.8% higher. The number of ships we have is 15% lower than it was in 1998. The number of planes we have is 11% fewer than 1998. The logical question, and I do not mean this to be combative or rhetorical, but the logical question a taxpayer would ask is this. If we're spending nearly 50% more than we did exclusive of special operations overseas, Iraq and Afghanistan, and we have essentially the same number of people in uniform, we have 15% fewer ships and 11% fewer planes, why does it cost 50% more?
Well, you're absolutely right. You know, I left the Pentagon in 1998, in 2001, where the Army budget was about the base budget was about 76, 78 billion. That base budget is more than doubled. So there's been a lot of growth. There's been growth in structure. There's been growth in personnel. There's been growth in a whole host of activities that we weren't engaged on to the extent that we're engaged in now, in the intelligence community, for example. And it's exactly, I think, this growth that Secretary Gates wants to get to.
I frankly ask my question because I am very sympathetic to Secretary Gates's premise, which is that there is an important distinction between our ability to vigorously defend our country and the overhead costs associated with that vigorous ability. I think the job for this committee, for the department, for the public, is where to draw that line. And I want to caution us against using superficial ways to draw that line. Mr. Conaway and I were just discussing before the hearing. It might be tempting to say, well, we have more accountants than we did in 1998. We may or may not, but just say hypothetically we do. So therefore, that's overhead that we don't need. Well, if those accountants are helping to better manage and get better quality out of technology programs, that's a superficial and inaccurate measure. So I raise my question to really make this point. I think the Secretary's premise is exactly right. I think that we have too much in the way of logistical support to execute our mission. I don't think we have too much mission. I don't think we overspend on the mission. I think we should be vigorous in pursuing it in every respect. But a hard question the department has to ask, the Congress has to ask, the country has to answer is how did we focus on this logistical overhead and do a better job? I mean, I think that the rhetorical answer to the question I just asked is that we've had excessive growth in the overhead categories in these 12 years. And whether it is the way we buy technology or the way that we provide housing or the way that we move goods and services around the world, we have to do a better job at assessing what that is. Anybody else care to comment on that?
So I would actually I would like to agree with the statement that you just made. The Defense Department is a corporation. I think the construct of the Chief Management Officer and having us look across the Defense Department as a business enterprise is different. See, each of the military departments looks, and this is true for every component, tends to naturally look very locally to solve an immediate problem. I think the example of the computer solutions, right? You know, everybody buys locally. I think the construct of a CMO really forces the department to look corporately at what we do and how we do it. Is it tied to the strategy, the overarching mission of the department, and really analyze the execution piece? And I think that is one of the most powerful things that the CMO legislation has enabled us to do, and I think we're taking full advantage of that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair thanks the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Franks, 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for being here. Ms. McGrath, my first question has to do with the PowerPoint presentation that accompanied the Undersecretary of Defense, Ashton Carter's memorandum. You're probably familiar with it. It was titled Better Buying Power, Mandate for Restoring Affordability and Productivity in Defense Spending. And I thought it was pretty interesting. I actually agreed with a lot of it. He used, quote, the leveraging real competition as his first initiative for greater efficiency, and I certainly think that makes all the sense in the world. And it was to support a continuous competitive environment. And you probably know where I'm going here. Given that language and the fact that the F-35 is the largest weapons system acquisition program in the Department of Defense, how can the administration with a straight face support the termination of the F-35 alternate engine, given that that is clearly, you know, providing a continuous competitive environment consistent with the debate in Undersecretary Carter's memorandum?
So I'd like to say that I agree with Secretary Carter's approach to trying to achieve better, I'll call it holistic acquisition, and there are a lot of different attributes you can use to achieve that, one being competition. I am not familiar with all of the specifics on the issue that you raised, and I'd be happy to come back to you with any specific answers that I can.
Well, let me do this. Let me let anyone else on the panel have a shot at that question. This is, again, the largest acquisitions, defense-related acquisitions for the department. And this is clearly one of those things where we're underscoring a continuous competitive environment, which is mandated. It's not suggested. It's mandated in the Mr. Carter or Undersecretary Carter's memorandum. And how do we synchronize those two things? How do we make them fit together? And Mr. Westphal or anyone else that would like to take a shot at it?
Well, luckily for me, I don't have to deal with that on the Army side, but I will tell you this. We face that similar issue across all our portfolios for our weapon systems. And what the Vice Chief and I, Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, have done at the direction of the Secretary McHugh is to stand up a holistic review to validate all our requirements across all portfolios of our systems. We need to go back and say, do we need this today? We may have needed it 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 3 years ago, but are we using it? Is it of value? Are we spending more money? Do we have duplication and redundancy in those systems? So we've taken the approach that in order to manage this better, and this gets to a lot of the questions you're posing, that we have to go back to the requirements piece. We have to validate those requirements across a series of portfolios of systems that we have and ensure that that makes sense today.
Well, I'm sure it doesn't shock any of you that this Republican is talking about competition, but go ahead.
Mr. Franks, I'll jump in, and as both the Air Force and the Navy and Marine Corps are involved in the Joint Strike Fighter program, I'll let Secretary Work jump in as needed. I think what you say about competition across the board is very important. I think where Secretary Gates and the two service secretaries came down on the question of the alternate engine was a judgment call and a balance, looking at the cost of the program in the near term, the benefit that may accrue over time, and the benefits of competition. As you know, some former programs, fighter programs, have had an alternate engine, some have not. And I think in the judgment of the Secretary of Defense, the upfront cost over the next couple of years of completing that program did not, on balance, was not outweighed by the benefits on the other side. And definitely understand the committee has strong feelings on this subject.
Well, thank you. I'm going to try to squeeze one more in, Mr. Chairman. In the last 2 years, many of the programs, particularly many missile defense programs that I believe are actually vital to our national security, have been cut substantially or even zeroed out. And many of our technological programs require time to realize those successes, even though the technology shows great promise and has demonstrated its knowledge points. For instance, the airborne laser, I think, is a good example. What are the services doing to make sure that we don't incentivize the termination of programs that could ultimately prove vital to our national security? And I'm going to throw that out to anyone as well.
Well, sir, from the Department of the Navy's perspective, the way this works is within the department, we have a very structured way to go about the different requirements. A Deputy Advisory Working Group, which reports to the Secretary, who holds small and large groups with all the combatant commanders, and that's where the requirements are really set. As far as ballistic missile defense goes, we think it's actually a very good news story. I'll let Secretary Westphal speak to THAAD and PAC-3.
Mr. Franks, your
Yes,
time has
sir.
expired. What I'm going to ask is that each of the witnesses submit that for the record.
All right, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Marshall, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My questioning has to do with the F-35 alternate engine as well, and since it's pretty clear that nobody here is prepared to testify too much on that subject, I'm just going to make some observations. I think most on the committee agree that this is not a close call. This is an exercise of very poor judgment by the Secretary and the two service secretaries. It's such poor judgment that we can't even figure out really where it's coming from. It's arguably defensible, but here we're going to spend $110 billion over a 20 to 30 year period of time, and we are essentially saying we're going to sole source that contract. We'll buy thousands of these engines. This is not a small buy. It's not for a brief period of time. And the idea behind the competition is that it is ongoing. Secretary Gates has recently said that he believes his idea, his notion of competition is winner takes all. I think he needs to have a little bit broader notion of competition with regard to these long-term projects like this one. We want competition throughout the duration of the project. I talked to a retired Navy commander, Marine, flew fighter jets, and he described the problems that they were having with the F-16 when there was only one engine, and then the benefits that they experienced once there was a competing engine. I don't know that this is actually how it was structured, but he believes that the way the competition was structured, and it was annual competition here for better performance, better reliability, better responsiveness. Every single year, the two competing companies were vying with one another to see who was going to get 60% of the buy in the following year. And it went back and forth between the two companies, the effect of which, at least according to this retired commander, was a remarkable improvement in the number of F-16s that could actually fly, their performance, their reliability, et cetera. GAO, looking at the F-16, if I recall correctly, it was either 21% or 34% savings over the life of the program as a result of competition. The Pentagon's own figures acknowledge that the short-term costs that you describe the Pentagon as not being interested in incurring right now, because we've got tough budget disputes at the moment, those short-term costs will be repaid almost certainly. And that doesn't take into account the likelihood that there will be huge savings as a result of the competition that I described that went on where the F-16 is concerned. So I don't have a parochial interest in this at all. When I first started getting involved in this, I didn't even know who was building the engines. But we make a huge mistake by sole sourcing a 20 or 30 year, $110 billion program. And I hope that that message gets back to the two secretaries and the Secretary of Defense, all of whom I respect enormously. I think they're doing a great job for the country, but their judgment is really flawed on this one, and I don't know where it comes from. It's so off base. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chair thanks the gentleman for yielding back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Conaway, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And witnesses, thank you for being here this morning. I don't discount for 1 second the difficulty in achieving auditability or business management systems transformation, all those things. It is a spectacularly complex issue across all your agencies. In a 2-hour hearing, you just simply cannot do justice to that. But I am concerned that given the revolving door that is your jobs, that 6 years from now, we'll have someone sitting in Ms. McGrath's position talking about, yes, the Deputy Chief Management Officer system is working and is working fine. But auditability and business management system transfer, those words roll off your tongue very well. Business enterprise architecture, enterprise transition plans, enterprise resource planning, business transformation agency, all of that sounds wonderful. And to the uninitiated, it sounds like we're making progress. But I believe it creates fog. And we hide in the fog the lack of progress that we're making. There's a long litany of fires or financial improvement, whatever that thing is, from 1990 to today. And each time we have a change in leadership, we have a new plan. And we don't execute the plan fully to the end of it goes. So it's not really a question, but it is an observation that this is hard. And I recognize how hard it is, but it's important as well. It's no different in the business arena, in which the pointy end of the sword in business doesn't like the back office guys, and there's always that tension between resources and this mission and those things. But we can't, I don't believe, do the mission properly for the taxpayer of this country without being able to tell them that we spend all this money correctly. We may spend every nickel perfectly, but we can't prove it to anybody. GAO has a litany of high-risk arena areas that the DOD has never had one come off their list. It just gets longer. And so all of us on this side are committed to doing what it takes to get you the resources and have you keep those resources as you go forward. I am concerned that as this efficiency model that comes, that Secretary Gates has talked about, if you looked at that chart, it looks to me like it's a across-the-board cut. Everybody gets $28 billion. And you figure out where it comes from, even though your individual budgets may be different, your individual needs in the next 10 years may be different, and there doesn't appear to be any, at least on the surface, rationale as to how we came to the goal, the $101 billion over that time frame, which I think is about 3+% of total spending within the department over the next 5 years. But I worry that you'll inordinately punish or take advantage of the resources that ought to be used to attain auditability and these management systems transferred, because those don't have a lot of champions in the system, but spending money somewhere else, O&M do have champions in the system. Long statement, 4 minutes worth. Can you talk a little bit about cross-pollination between particularly the 3 service branches, because each of you has an auditability goal, and I'm hoping that the Marine Corps is still on track to get their goal accomplished. The goal of that first audit is laudable and is important, but the better goal is auditability over going forward. And we can all make Herculean efforts one time to get something done, but if you can't replicate that because the systems didn't get developed along the way, then we really haven't achieved much beyond just that, pat ourselves on the back for that first audit. So you have some sort of a cross-pollination system among yourself, because you're going to be doing the same back office functions across your 3 departments.
So if I could just make a couple of comments, and then to the extent my counterparts want to add. The Undersecretary of Defense Comptroller, Undersecretary Hale, hosts or convenes a Fire Financial Improvement Audit Readiness Governance Board where we all participate. We're all members of the governance board. In fact, I co-chair with him, because we are taking a look across the defense enterprise, not just in the financial space, understanding the systemic changes we need to make to ensure auditability. So it isn't.
Well, let me ask you this. You get to that point, and you've got to make a decision. The Army wants one system, the Navy, Marine Corps wants a system, the Air Force wants a. who makes the hard call to say, this is the system that we're going to go to, we're going to go common across all three and force it on them? Is there a system, is anybody in the Department of Defense have that authority to do
So
that?
the common piece are the standards. So if each of the military departments today and the services are pursuing different financial solutions that at the end of the day will enable auditability across the enterprise because we're using a common set of standards. It's the standards that will drive the auditability.
All right, well, thank you for what you're doing. I know it's hard, but it is important. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your first question, Mr. Chairman, regarding the commissioning coming up a week from Saturday of the USS Missouri, again, focused on a successful program in the Navy, which, again, I think, just to reiterate the point that you made, this ship, this submarine, was built with 10 million man-hours. The first in its class, in the Virginia class, the USS Virginia, was built with 14 million man-hours. In other words, a $4 million man-hour reduction. The first submarine was built, it took 87 months. This one will take 60 months. And as we go into the next block of submarines that are in the Block 3 contract, which the Navy executed in December of '08, we're shooting for 55 months in terms of the construction. And what I would say is that we're not cutting corners. In fact, I think the capability of the Missouri surpasses the first in its class, so that obviously, you know, we've got a program where we've figured out a way to do it more efficiently, to in fact improve quality. And it was done because we innovated in the yard, because we created a culture of cost containment and cost savings. And it really, I think, is a model which, particularly in a shipbuilding account that is going to be stressed over the next 10 years or so, that I think we all should really pay heed to. And again, I think Mr. Andrews and Mr. Conaway's reform bills, the acquisition reform bills, which again are about trying to statutorily create a system where design and research is done upfront rather than on top of production, which is where I think we got into trouble with the LCS program. And I guess, you know, Mr. Warwick, I mean, we've spent a lot of time this year already talking about the SSBN, which clearly, looking out on the horizon, is going to put a lot of stress on the shipbuilding budget. And I guess my question to you is the Navy prepared to look at lessons learned from the Virginia program, the success which we clearly are seeing in real savings and quality, and applying it to that program, which again is going to be a challenge for this committee for many years to come?
Yes, sir, we are. The Virginia is actually the model we're using on the SSBNX. It's very important. Secretary Mabus himself is following the development of the requirements for that boat extremely carefully, and is working directly with the Chief of Naval Operations and Secretary Stackley, our Assistant Secretary of Navy for our research, development, and acquisition, to really get those requirements right so we don't overprice the boat. We understand the requirement to put the R&D in and getting our engineering drawings to a high degree of fidelity before we start construction. That's exactly our plan. We hope to be ready for the first boat in FY19. So we are using the Virginia as the model for that program.
Thank you, because, and I think, you know, some of the questions which have taken place this morning about not sacrificing our defense needs in the mission of trying to create efficiency. I mean, this clearly, I think, is the ultimate challenge, because the need for an Ohio replacement has been articulated in the QDR, the 30-year shipbuilding plan, the nuclear posture review. So, I mean, obviously, the need is there, and your budget shows a commitment to satisfy that need, but clearly, we've got to use every tool possible to try and create the efficiency so that we get that cost down to a manageable level, and certainly encourage you to keep going down that path. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Whitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the panel. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you so much for your service. Secretary Work, I want to go to you, and I want to expand upon Secretary Gates' efficiency initiative that he announced on May 8th at the Eisenhower Library. It seems like to me under that, and I want to get your assessment of that, it seems like to me that under that efficiency initiative, that's going to require an objective analysis of all decision-making surrounding expenditures. Am I correct in assuming that that's what will happen out of this process?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So under that, would you say that it's safe to assume then that there's going to be significant differences or changes in how departments make decisions on expenditures?
I'm not so certain it will be different, sir, in that Secretary Mavis has set up a procedure to get decisions to his level, the Commandant's level, and the CNO's level, so that those three leaders make decisions that are right for the department. So I don't think that the efficiency drill will change that, but it will just really tighten down when we look at every single decision on the final calculations we make.
So you would say then that we would be applying a pretty strict model of objective decision-making within deciding on expenditures.
I believe that is Secretary Mavis's intent in every decision.
Okay, very good. Let me go back a little bit then and go to some testimony before this committee of both the CNO and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. When asked about decision-making with the home porting there in Mayport, when asked, the CNO was asked, tell us about the objective analysis that was done, the risk assessment that was done behind that decision-making. The CNO said specifically, hadn't been done. This is a seat-of-the-pants judgment that we're going to make about strategic dispersal. Asked the same question to Admiral Mullen. Admiral Mullen said the same thing. Hasn't been an objective analysis done. This is a decision that we're making based on our best judgment, or again, seat-of-the-pants decision-making. I go back to a quote by Secretary Gates. Secretary Gates said specifically, we need to decide dispassionately about these sorts of efforts. Within that realm, do you believe then that the decision about home porting a carrier in Mayport should require an objective analysis before that decision is complete, since none has been done, since there hasn't been a risk analysis? Do you believe that under this efficiency initiative, then, that we need to go back and do an objective decision-making or go through an objective decision-making process on this home porting decision?
Sir, I don't believe we do. There is a balance between strategic requirements as well as efficiencies. In this case, the department, and as affirmed by the QDR, that the strategic rationale for the home porting decision is a good one. And I am reminded of, this reminds me somewhat, before the DDG 1000 program was truncated, the Department of the Navy wanted to single up into one yard for efficiency's sake. Mm-hmm. And we made the case that we would save about $300 million per boat, or per ship. And it was the Congress that intervened and said, look, you cannot take the risk of singling up into a single yard, because what would happen if that yard was hit by a catastrophic event? Mm-hmm. And the wisdom of the Congress was proven a year later in Katrina, when the yard down on the Gulf Coast was knocked out for a while. There was no objective risk analysis would give you a number on why you would do that. It's a strategic judgment of leadership that we basically say, this is a good call, and would trump a mere efficiency argument.
Well, then where would the line be drawn between when you make a strategic decision without objective analysis and when you make an objective analysis, which in this case, you can easily quantify the risks that you're trying to mitigate? So can you let me know where that line is? Is that a line that through this efficiency initiative that we're just going to kind of meander with?
No, sir, I think the process is on a quadrennial basis, do that in the quadrennial defense review. So we actually teed that up at the request of the committee, teed that up to the Secretary of Defense to ensure that our strategic judgment was sound, and they actually supported us. So every 4 years we have that, and then every year we have a means by which to bring up strategic concerns to the Deputy Secretary and the Secretary, and it's, in my view, a very effective way. I've been quite pleased over the last year to see it in action.
Okay. I'd like to get a copy, too, of the response to Congressman Forbes' question about how those scenarios then have changed. Obviously, there must be some quantifiable change that's there between the QDR, the BRAC, and then the 2010 QDR. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. We have 2 votes. We will return as quickly as we can and resume the inquiry, so please have patience with us. We shall return. We're in recess.